All right, hey y'all, welcome back to the Budburst Podcast. Got an awesome guest today, JR Butler from the Shift Group, founder there. We're going to be we're literally covering a lot of topics today, so we're going to jump right in here in a minute. I found JR actually through friends of friends of friends on LinkedIn who said, check this guy out. What he's doing is pretty awesome, and I think it'll be right up your alley. So I've been following you now for, I don't know, a couple quarters, JR, and they were totally right. Your content that you put out there is great. And I think the mission for Shift Group is something that resonated deeply with me. And I think will for our audiences too. So looking forward to diving into it. Do you mind giving our audience a quick background on you as well before we kind of jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm born and raised in central Massachusetts, the oldest son of three of a Hall of Fame high school hockey coach. Was fortunate to use my hockey skills to go to a great secondary institution, College of the Holy Cross, part of a team that upset University of Minnesota, still considered the biggest upset in college hockey history. Graduated in 2008 with a sociology major and a minor in art history. So I was destined to be a sales guy. Started my career in the reseller world, spent 7 years at a regional reseller that got acquired in a private equity roll-up, and joined an early stage startup called VM Turbo, and kind of climbed the leadership ladder there, ultimately becoming a VP. It became Turbonomic. We were acquired by IBM. And then I spent 2.5 years as a chief revenue officer at another early stage startup. And then I started Shift Group about 20 months ago. And that's been my focus ever since.
Yeah, I love it. So you've had, I think, like an incredible early career. We'll talk a little bit today about that jump from the stress, the pressure, and then ultimately getting the reward too of playing athletics at a pretty high level, and how you're sort of translating that into the business world. But maybe just thinking about the Shift Group first, can you give the audience a little bit of the why behind that? Like, I think it's important. It's super impactful for me as we got to meet, and I'm sure they'd love to hear it too. Like, why do that? And kind of what's the why behind the what?
So I started Shift Group for myself at 2 points in my life. The first and probably most relevant is when you dedicate like 10 to 25 years of your life to a single purpose, and it automatically becomes a huge part of your identity. Athletes very early on in their life, usually in my case, I was 24, that gets taken away from you. I struggled in a really deep way with that transition, losing hockey, the combination of like losing hockey, entering a job market that was the worst it had been in 100 years, but also having a little brother who was, at the time I retired out of hockey, was becoming an All-American and like one of the leading scorers in the country. I was angry, the effect that the transition had on me, it affected me in a way where I turned to drugs and alcohol, and ultimately kind of just like struggled for like 2 or 3 years, because I had this thing that drove me my whole life, and I just didn't have anything driving me anymore. And then I found a career in sales, and it checked every box that I didn't even realize I needed. Being on a team, competing every day, working in a profession that's driven by your effort and your results, and being rewarded accordingly. All the things that I loved about sports, I found in sales. Now, I tripped and fell into it. Most people that are salespeople, very rarely do you have a kid in 7th grade standing up in class being like, I want to be a sales guy someday. So that's the number one kind of reason I started the company, is like moving to that next phase in your life with intention makes all the difference in the world. I'm the grandson of 2 veterans. I'm from a part of Massachusetts that's very blue collar. A lot of my high school buddies enlisted and served in the military. I saw them go through the same exact kind of issues that I did when I lost hockey. So that has always been the vision of the business. Is we started with athletes. In the last 12 months, we added veterans. And now that's what we do. We give a platform for athletes and veterans to transition with intention into a career in sales. We do that through self-discovery, career discovery, and career upskilling. And then we introduce them to companies that understand their value as an athlete or as a veteran. The second part of our offering is, again, it's built for myself. Like, I hired salespeople for like 12 out of the 16 years that I was in sales. I had a number, I had a team to develop, and then, we raised some money, and my CEO comes to me and my peers and is like, you got to hire 50 people this quarter. So now you've got, there's only so many hours in a week. You've got to drive the number. You got to develop your existing people, and you got to interview hundreds of people to get to the 50 that you have to hire. And I never really understood that making such a big decision, right? Even in an entry-level salesperson, that's a 6-figure bet that you're making. It never made sense to me that it's like, I'm going to look at a piece of paper that tells me who this person is. They're going to talk to a couple people in my organization, and then I'm going to meet with them for 30, maybe 60 minutes. And then I'm going to make a 6-figure bet on that person. I just always thought there was a better way to do it. And that's, again, so like both sides of our marketplace, I've lived both sides. Those are the two sides of the market that I built it for: the athlete or veteran that's transitioning, and that sales leader that needs to build like a kick-ass, team-oriented culture that's performance-based and driven. That's really kind of how the company came about.
I love it, man. I think anytime I personally feel like I encounter folks who are solving a real market problem, but something they've also lived, it just feels and hits different. And so I like the personal experiences you've had. I didn't play at a high level. I played Division III, but I still remember losing baseball for me and how impactful that was. I also remember not really knowing what sales was. And there's like a little bit of a negative stigma, at least, as I grew up, pretty blue collar too, single income. My dad would work for the government, and it just wasn't something on my radar. And so I feel blessed that in some of the jobs I had that were sort of around sales, I got exposure to it, sort of demystified, and then was able to kind of find it for myself. So I love this mission, right? This idea of taking, you've got athletes, you've got veterans, similarly skilled, great, like sort of like they've got these intangibles maybe, but they don't have the skilling, right? Some of the like on paper stuff you might look for on a resume. And so Shift Group's able to let them get exposed to what this thing is, see if it's right for them, and then you can give them some of that skilling, some of that tooling, so that they can meet that, kind of the bar that a lot of, I'm sure, potential employers are looking for. One of the things I want to chat with you about, man, when you think about what's the bar for these men and women as they're making that transition? Is it in the marketplace? Is it just getting that first job? I mean, I can remember seeing job ads that were like, minimum 5 years experience required, and sort of wanted to pull my hair out as a younger guy. I mean, like, how the hell do I get 5 years experience? There's nobody to give me a shot. So what are some of the hurdles they've got to get over, and how more specifically are you helping the folks that are kind of coming into your program?
Well, I think like it's like any transition you make in your life, like you have to, the first and foremost thing that we emphasize with our people is like, you have to go into every transition with a beginner's mindset. Like, Brian, I'm a new dad, and I am like, the amount of information that I learn every single day about like, what does that mean? And like, how to think about like the littlest thing of like how to warm a bottle or change a diaper. Like, I'm approaching that with like a true beginner's mindset. And because of that, I'm getting better every day and I'm learning every day. And I think that's the first like hump that every one of these people that we work with has to get over. The example I'll use is we work with professional athletes, and we also work with special forces veterans. And we talk about elite, and I have data that can tell you why, even though you played Division III baseball, you're still an elite athlete. The numbers tell us that. But these types of people, right? Professional athletes, special forces, that's like the elite of the elite. And these people come and there's a high bar of expectation from like a compensation perspective and like the responsibilities they're going to get in their first job. But then I'll always say to like a professional basketball player, I'll be like, okay, well, we have a 12-year Navy SEAL. Can he play for your basketball team this season? He's like really elite. He's phenomenal. He's been on, 14 combat missions. And of course, they're like, no, of course not. And then to the special forces veteran, we'll say, all right, LeBron James wants to be a Navy SEAL. Can he come on a combat mission? And they're like, no, of course not. I'm like, what do you mean? He's the best athlete ever. And the reason we bring that up is like, it does, yes, you have some foundational things that put you ahead above other people, but the reality is tactically and technically, you don't have the skills, you don't have the knowledge yet where you can step into that like high level role just because you were a high level human in your last life, right? So that's like the biggest hurdle that we see people having to get over, especially those types of people, is helping them understand that like they got to start from scratch a little bit. It's not truly from scratch. That's why we focus on athletes and veterans. And that's the message we say is like, hey, you're a step ahead of everybody else because of this life experience you have, but here's how you got to close the gap. So that's number one. Number two, I would say is I always emphasize this with every candidate we work with, what the company does, how big the company is, even things like compensation. Those are all secondary, in my opinion, to the person that you're going to go work for the first time. Because there's a lot of data out there that tells us the first 6 months of any new endeavor is the most important. And if you can build the right habits and the right mindsets in those first 6 months, it means the next 16 years is going to be way, way better. So we try to help them understand like the thing they need to look for above all other things is, can you go work for somebody that you feel like you're going to learn from, that you feel like is going to foundationally put you in a direction where you'll be successful, and it's someone that you admire, right? And that's, I think, the message that we're trying to deliver to our candidates is like, that's the number one thing to look for. If you find that, it doesn't matter if you eventually want to go to medical device, but start in tech, or you eventually want to get into, you know, a sports sales career or whatever. It's all about that leader and how you're going to foundationally build the right habits and mindset. That's my opinion, but I think it's been proven like many, many times over.
Are there folks in your past, JR, that you would point to that you know were like great mentors and leaders for you that sort of helped you bridge the gap? I totally agree with this, by the way. I've been, I think, lucky. You know, there's some element of you make your own luck, but at the end of the day, like you bump into people, it's a little bit serendipitous when you look in the rearview mirror. So are there folks you would say like played that role for you?
Yeah, dude, it's so true. And I think it's one of the things that drove me to start Shift Group is like, I went to a really small reseller, my first like full-time sales job. And it was like 4 or 5 guys, including my main boss, but even my peers, guys that I was really a BDR for, where like they shaped who I became as a sales professional. And it was, you know, it was like, what I brought to the table was like I was a sponge, and I paid attention, and I looked at like, okay, this person's making a lot of money. What about them allows them to make a lot of money? But I was also self-aware to be like, oh, they're not very good at this, and this is a bad habit that they have. I'm not going to take that from them. So like when people ask me like what made me successful in sales, I can talk about these 5 people that I learned from initially my first 3 years. And what made me good at sales was what was really good about each of them. So I kind of like stole from all of them and like became like a super rep based off of their strengths, and trying to pay attention to their weaknesses and not take those into my own.
Any examples? Like what are some of the things that you feel like you learned, and like gaps that you knew you wanted to make sure, or maybe gaps is the wrong word. Yeah. Weaknesses that you wanted to make sure you actively solved for, so you didn't end up kind of with the same skilling.
I won't use a name, but we had a guy on the team we were a reseller, right? And there's 50 resellers in New England at the time. He was so good at telling our company story, right? What are the people? What is the process? What are the products that make us unique in this crowded market in New England for EMC and VMware resellers? So good at it. And I stole that from him. But when he got into deals, he would discount the hell out of stuff to get deals done. And I always, you know, we'd be on the 1 yard line. He'd drop a $500,000 deal by $50,000 to $100,000. And I always thought he gave away too much leverage. So I stole his ability to tell the company story and position the company as a true value add. But I completely was like, I'm not going to discount. Like, that's not going to be the way I close deals. It's going to be, I'm going to steal this other guy who was really good at getting stuff over the finish line. I'm going to steal that from him and replace the discounting methodology. You know what I mean? That's like a real life example.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that's like one of the things I want to circle back to if we can. I think potentially one of the reasons you were able to do that, again, goes back to these experiences and life experiences you have as an athlete, or I assume as a veteran, where you've got to be coachable, right? You've got to look across your teammate, whether that's a SEAL team or a basketball team, and see what others are doing well. Make sure you let them continue to do that well. Figure out where you need to fit in as a leader, right? And like very actively solve a specific problem. Play to your strengths. Get coaching, right? Get better at things. So if you were going to give advice to someone who's hiring, right? If we take the other side of your business and they're about to go hire 50 people in the next quarter, what are some of the intangibles and sort of life experiences that you would recommend that they sort of like sort for, right? I think it's easy for people to say, oh, I want 5 years of experience doing this, and you had to hit quota 4 or 5 years. Cool. Like, what are the humans, like the folks that you engage with all the time, these veterans, these athletes, what are some of the things they bring to the table that are unique that you want to push, folks like you, like me, that are hiring to really consider more?
Well, you hit one, which is coachability. I think it's probably, one A or 1B is coachability. Like, you've got to hire somebody that can take feedback, not take it personally, use it to get better. I actually think 1A is in entry level sales is resiliency, because guess what? You're going to suck at the beginning. Like, it is going to be brutal. You're going to be told no 100 out of 101 times. You can't slow down because of that. You have to come the next day with the same vigor and conviction you had the day before when you got kicked in the teeth 100 times. And you've got to keep doing that until 100 out of 101 becomes 91 out of 101 and 80 out of 101. And by the way, Hall of Fame numbers are 70 out of 101, you get kicked in the teeth. So that resiliency piece is huge. I also believe in my bones that sales is a team sport, and you have to hire people that can come into an organization and work with people that aren't like them, that don't think like them, that don't come from the same background as them, and don't have the same personality, but they can work together to achieve a common goal, right? I think those three, if you can just capture those three things alone, you're already off to a start. And to your point, I can teach you how to use Salesforce in like 2 days. Very easy. I cannot teach you how to be coachable, how to be a good teammate, how to be resilient. I can't teach you like growth mindset. I cannot teach you to have a growth mindset. Like, you're either the type of person that is comfortable being uncomfortable and believes they can get better at something, or you're not. And I do think, like, with neuroplasticity, we can build those things over time as we get older. But as a company, you don't want to be on the hook for that, right? Like, you need to hire these people that already have these intangible characteristics. And I think those 4 are probably the most core ones, which is to back it up: resiliency, teamwork, coachability, and a growth mindset. I think those 4, if you can capture those in your interview process, how you ask questions, the stories that you hear from candidates, you're already 10 steps ahead of the curve.
I love this distinction of what are the things we can teach and what are the things, and maybe even more narrowly, what are the things we could teach in a narrowish time frame, right? A couple months, couple quarters. And what are the things that I know I need to have, like, in the DNA of these humans that we want on our teams? So yeah, coachability, resiliency, this like concept of what being a good teammate is, and then that growth mindset. I totally agree with all of those. What's the other side of the coin? So now you're speaking to an athlete or a veteran who's considering sales, maybe. Like, we've talked about, like, you get all these things you've worked hard to build, right? In either of those worlds, they do translate well into sales. What's the other side of the coin, though, JR? Like, you think about people that, maybe wash out, right? Why? What are the things they're maybe not expecting when they kind of consider a role in sales as in that sort of transitionary period?
Well, I think like one thing we didn't hit on that I think can be a make or break, because most athletes and veterans are going to have those 4 things that we just talked about. the one piece that's pretty important in sales is competitiveness. And, we see this, like, not everybody, not competitive doesn't mean the same thing for everybody else. I think if you're not comfortable, having like a very black and white win or loss and a very black and white depth chart, like, hey, you're the 10th sales rep out of 10 sales reps. And that's on the dashboard every single day. And if that doesn't drive you to work harder, but rather it makes you shut down and give up, this isn't the right career. 100% not. Like, you've got to have that inner drive to be the best. And in the context of being a good teammate, that's kind of that connection is critical. That's why I think good teammate is above competitiveness. The other piece, and I believe this as well, sales is a horrible career to make a mediocre salary because of all the things we talked about. Like, it is not fun to get kicked in the teeth 100 out of 101 times. So if you're not coin operated, if money and like drive and making like good amount of money and controlling that outcome financially isn't important to you, I don't think you should be in sales. Like, I think you should go be a teacher or, some other career where you know exactly what you're going to make every year and it doesn't really matter. But if you are truly like coin operated and driven by making money, and it's in a personality assessment, it comes out as like profit awareness, then chances are you're gonna have all the other things that it's gonna make you a good salesperson. So I think the people that wash out in our program, because we ask them to do a lot before they interview, they ultimately decide like, hey, I'm okay making this amount of money, and I don't like the trade-off, and we're gonna see this more and more with the younger generation. Like, money isn't as important to the younger generation as it was to guys like me and you, Brian. They have other things that they care about, and that's okay, by the way. Like, I'm completely okay with that. But like, trying to decide if you're truly coin operated, I do think it's actually really important. It's uncomfortable for most people to talk about, but that's the reality. Is like, I think you have to want to make a lot of money to be really good at sales for a long time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that let you be okay with the suck, the grind, the like you said, 100 out of 101 no's. And that does get old. It doesn't matter what your psyche is, what your personality is. And if you don't have that sort of long-term view of this is the way I'm going to create wealth for me, for my family, for whatever, I agree. I think that you'll see people sort of wash out. I wrote this down. I'm probably not quoting you directly, but something like sales is a horrible way to make a mediocre salary. Say more about that. Is that just is the point there that if you don't have these intangibles that make sales sort of easy, right? I've got a similar, I think, quote where it's like, if for the right person, sales is the easiest job there is. For the wrong person, it's the hardest. And so like some of that is, especially if and when like I find something I'm really passionate about that I know is going to have an impact on my prospects and my clients. I like to talk to people. I like to get to know. I like to kind of hear their story. I like to help them solve business problems. And so I think that is very easy for me. It does come pretty naturally. If not, right, and for me, like the other side of that is if you don't have those sort of like natural curiosity about who these humans are and how their business runs and how you might be able to help, I've got to imagine it's a really, really tough, maybe impossible job. Are you making the same point there? Or is there something kind of underneath that's a little bit more nuanced?
Well, I think it's that, but it's also like all the stuff that comes with sales. It's inherently a very stressful job, because on January 1st, you are betting 50% of your compensation on yourself. And the way that you're going to win that bet is hard work and driving a lot of activity, turning that activity into productivity, and turning that productivity into revenue. And what I just described is hard as hell, super stressful. And you're going to, like I said, you're going to have a lot more in that 1 year, you're going to have a lot more losses than you're going to have wins. So if you're comfortable making, $80,000 to $100,000, I would argue like, well, then why would you want to put yourself through that? You know what I mean? So it's a combination of like, do you enjoy the actual job, which is what you're talking about? but then do you enjoy the things that make the job stressful? Because the stuff you're talking about, that's the fun part for me too. I'm the same way. I love getting to know people, love understanding what they're trying to accomplish and how I can help them accomplish that. I hate updating Salesforce. I hate when people go dark on me and ghost me. And I always tell people that's what the money's for, man. Like that, you're not getting paid to go to steak dinners, dude. That's the fun part. You're getting paid for the hard part. And if that hard part is truly, really makes you miserable, then I just don't think you should be a salesperson. I think you should look in another space where you can make that same salary without making all those sacrifices that you have to make.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm glad I asked. That's clarifying for me and hopefully for folks that are listening too. So I'd love to ask you, man, like what's advice you might give like to leaders that are considering hiring, vets, someone from Shift Group, right? A vet or a former athlete. How do you think, like, how do leaders need to either think about these folks, managing them, leading them, maybe potentially differently than others?
So I think like when I think about like ultimately, I think the people that get through our program are what you would call like an A player as a sales leader. And I think there are certain things, regardless of veterans and athletes, but there are certain things that are specific to them that are really important to emphasize and to consider. Like first and foremost, you do have to be good, I think, especially further on in somebody's career, like selling them on the opportunity and the potential outcome, whether that's W-2 or like, what the potential equity that they're going to get is there, right? So that's like kind of par for the course. But I think the other thing that our people look for and that the type of culture that our people really thrive in is like a culture of excellence. So like high expectations, high standards. Like it's not just about like the potential outcomes, but it's like, how do you get to those outcomes, right? It's very clear. And think of like every great dynasty in sports that's ever existed. I'm a Boston guy, so I always point back to the Patriots. And I think Bill Belichick is famous for building this culture of excellence and high expectations. And, for a long time, people would pass up places like Miami and Dallas and San Diego and these amazing cities that they could go live and play in and pay less taxes and sacrifice to go to New England to live and play in that culture because they knew that culture would lead to winning. So I think that's a critical thing. I also think athletes and veterans want to go into a culture of growth and development. So consistent coaching, consistent focus on improvement, right? I always think like growth and development is actually more important than the outcomes. I think clearly defined goals, metrics, and KPIs. Like athletes and veterans have grown up in a world where they know what the mission is, they know what the expectations are, and there's a scoreboard. If you don't have that already built into your organization, these people are going to struggle, right? If there's no clarity and everything is very vague, we don't do well. Athletes and veterans don't do well in a vague environment. We typically, we do these personality assessments and we find that athletes score very low on initiative, and same thing with veterans, which sounds surprising, but if you actually took a step back and thought about it, right? Like think about all the way through your college baseball career. Every single season, you knew exactly where you were supposed to be and how you were supposed to be prepared, whether that was video practice, lift, games, whatever. So we've been told what to do and what's expected of us. If you're not doing that in your organization, these types of people are going to struggle because they're used to being coached. So they need that clarity and that vagueness. The other thing, and it kind of couples into that, is autonomy. A lot of people want to do sales because it's like there's no clock in, clock out. It's just like, what's my number at the end of the quarter? It's great, but I don't think that type of environment serves veterans and athletes very well for the same reason we just talked about. I think they want autonomy, but they want a playbook. It's like, hey, this is what's expected of you. Here's how other people have achieved that in a quarter. Here's the playbook. How you institute it, you should have the autonomy to do it, but you need the playbook. So it's like playbook over autonomy, clarity over vagueness, process over mission, and growth development over outcomes. So those are the things like the leaders we talk to, we actually ask them that, like, hey, talk to us about what your culture is around development and training and coaching. Talk to us about the processes you put in place and the playbooks you put in place that these folks are going to learn, and talk to us about the metrics, KPIs, and expectations you have of someone. If they can't answer those questions, we know that's going to be a risky company for us to work with, because even the best people with this background aren't probably going to do very well in that environment.
A lot to unpack there. I took some notes. So this idea of like understanding their motivation, understanding their why, and then being able to kind of like bring that back up. I agree. I think the best leaders to a person understand exactly what those motivators are for their team. And I don't mean in mass, I mean each individual on their team. They know that, this person wants to pay off their parents' house. This person wants a boat. This person's got kids, and maybe one of them's about to get married. There's a wedding to pay, like whatever it is. This person wants to your point, like the growth and development, they want to be in leadership. And so we're like mentoring and coaching them through that. So I think that's absolutely critical. And I would underscore it as well. This other concept of this culture of excellence. Actually, I think we talked about this in one of our previous conversations, JR, but like for me, it's great leaders set really clear expectations and then hold people accountable. And I think especially for athletes, veterans, that piece has got to be there. Like there's got to be enough autonomy, to your point, that it doesn't feel like kindergarten. But they've also got to know what's expected of them. And then they've got to feel it, like the pat on the back when they crush it, and maybe the kick in the pants if they don't. And I think that is like really, really important in any sales culture, but especially with these kind of like A players like you described. I'd love to talk just a little bit more about growth and development. Like, what are the things that you guys are doing at Shift to kind of help your folks grow and develop? And then what are the gaps that you still see the industry kind of needing to help more of these folks make the transition?
So we focus first and foremost on development. It's about like self-discovery. It's hard for people to get better if they don't know what their strengths and their gaps are. So that's like foundationally the most important piece. And then the next piece is it's like skills and knowledge. So for technology sales, mostly we focus on entry-level sales. I've been in the space for 16 years. I know that if I could wave a magic wand for a BDR that I was going to hire, what would I want them to know? So we get really tactical. We teach them best practices on account research, how to use that research to turn it into an effective cold email, how to make an effective cold call, how to do discovery, and how to use sales tools. Like if somebody can do those 5 things, they're going to be successful. And when we target a new industry, like we just got into med device, we're getting into pharma, we're working with people like me with a background like me to understand what's their magic wand 5 skills. And every industry, no matter what, we teach the sales process, the buying process, and the team structure, so they know exactly what the environment is. And we teach operational excellence, because even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So we want them to understand that they can have an operating rhythm and an operating cadence that can set them up for success. And athletes and veterans understand that inherently. So we get really deep and tactical when it comes to preparation. Before they have to go through that, Brian, before they're allowed to interview with any of our customers.
Really cool. So thinking about your customers and where you place these folks, I'm going to guess that it's probably more small companies, but is that right? Like, or is it across the spectrum of kind of like early, small, VC backed, companies, or all the way up to your kind of Salesforce Oracles and everything in between? Or are there like bullseyes and sweet spots?
Big percentage of, like you said, venture backed, fast growth companies. Funny enough, when I started the company was like end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So my first like 4 customers were actually big publicly traded companies. And I was like, oh, wow, like they're going to hire 35 people from us this quarter. This is amazing. Now we hit summer 2022, that well dried up, and we pivoted and focused on venture-backed startups by design. When you start looking and now what we're seeing with the market is we got a couple publicly traded companies that just signed up with us. So those organizations are coming back. I think we can serve everybody from a Series A early stage startup to a $40 billion publicly traded company and everything in between. And I think we have to get good at matching personalities on that side. When you start getting into other industries like medical device and pharma, every company is a big publicly traded company. Like there's not a lot of like fast growth, early stage med device companies. If they are, they're usually, there's like 1099 salespeople and they're just trying to drive revenue. So like a Stryker or a Smith and Nephew goes and buys them. So I think that market's going to be very different for us, but we are shining in the tech space in venture-backed, Series A through Series D startups. That's really our sweet spot for sure.
And how do you think about advising the men and women that kind of come into the program? Like, how should they think about early, venture-backed VC versus, massive $40 billion plus publicly traded company? What kind of advice would you give those folks as they're trying to figure out which one might be better for them?
I try to be careful, right? Because I don't like, if I just said, hey, this is why early stage companies are better, they would take that as like, well, you're just telling me that, JR, because that's the company you're trying to get me a job at. So what I usually do is I tell them my own story. I'm like, hey, here's how I became a chief revenue officer at 33 years old. Here's what my experience was. Here's like 5 of my friends that I grew up with, that I played hockey with, that are also in technology sales. You can look at their LinkedIn and see where they are today and where they've been. And those 4 or 5 people are all big company guys that have been at big companies. And I always say, it's like, it's not better. There's bigger companies aren't better, smaller companies aren't better. It's just very different. And you have to understand the difference. And I think if you're somebody who needs to sit in a classroom and learn and like have like very clear onboarding and process, you're probably better off going to a big company. If you need that like massive amount of structure and you're okay with no matter what you do for the next 12 months, nothing is going to change for you, then go to a big company. But most of our people are like, again, they're athletes and veterans. They want to be rewarded as quickly as possible for the outcomes that they drive and the effort they put in. And they want as much experience as possible because this is their first time in this new career. The best way to get more experience and a faster growth path is a smaller, earlier stage, fast growth company. So I try to position it as like, here's what this looks like. Here's what that looks like. You tell me what you want to do. Most of the people we work with would choose the smaller, fast growth company.
Yeah. Okay. Really like that too. This distinction of, like that small company by definition will and can move faster and can take note of you, but will be way less structured probably in how they onboard you and how they train you and probably in how they give you feedback as well. And the other side of that coin, your much larger companies, you're going to get a best in class training, right? Like all the IBM suits, right? Like for years and years and years, that was a thing. And you spent a year or two getting incredible training before you were even really engaging with clients. And so I think that's right. Like helping folks understand really what they think they need to be successful. I don't know that enough people are intentional when they think through that, and it's a little bit more reactive. So I think that's helpful too. Okay. I don't want to run this over. I know you've got a hard stop. I got a couple more questions. Like you mentioned this process where you sort of take these folks and you're training them on, doing great research, making those cold calls. It's hard. It's always been hard to make cold calls. I would argue it's harder now than it has been, maybe not ever, but certainly than it has been for the last few years. This idea that buyers are much more discerning. There's less budget to be speculative on things. They're only looking for things that have sort of like very clear ROI and that are tied to very clear strategic initiatives within the firm. Doesn't matter if that's Fortune 500 or you're selling to another startup, right? That seems broadly true. What's working? Like when you think about, in this market, I've said, I maybe even said this to you, I do think cold calls are either dead or on life support, but it's our job to make them warm. Like that doesn't mean you stop trying. That means you work your ass off to make sure you understand that business, that human as best you can, and that you can talk to their problems and how potentially you can help so the call doesn't feel cold. What are you seeing, man? Like you've got this amazing platform, lots of folks, lots of different companies. What's working kind of at a macro level?
Well, I think like the number one thing we talk about is like to be a human. Just be yourself. When you pick up that phone, be yourself, be confident and be authentic. It's really, really hard to do that if you don't have confidence and conviction in like why you're picking up the phone. So to your point, you have to earn the right to ask for this person's time through research and preparation. So that's what we emphasize with people is like, hey, you're not just cranking through a list of 1,000 people and just calling everybody with this title. You're calling this person at this company for this specific reason. You have an opinion. It's a well-researched opinion. And if you do that type of preparation and research, the confidence is going to come across. You know, Brian, I just read this article. I saw this quote you said. I really think spending 20 minutes with us talking about our power dialer would really help you solve this problem you talked about in this article. Would you have time next Wednesday? And dude, I'm just being myself. I'm just like, hey, this is what I think. This is what I read. This is what I understand. If it's not a good time or whatever, that's fine. I wanted to call you because I'm trying to help you. And this is how I think I can help you. So I think that human element gets lost a lot in some of the LinkedIn advice that's out there. You know, there's all these tips and tricks. I think it really comes down to a simple like research and prepare and approach every call with confidence and conviction and authenticity. And yeah, you're still going to get kicked in the teeth. People are going to hang up on you. You're going to call someone right when they're walking into a meeting or they're already in a meeting and you tricked them because you had a local number and they got a kid in school and they're worried about that. That's going to happen. But don't take it personal. I always tell people, don't take it personal. They don't even know you. How can it be personal? You know what I mean? So that's to me, that's like the trick of cold calling. That was the trick in 2008 when I got out of college and the United States was losing a bank a week. That was not a great time to cold call companies, right? We're not as bad as a situation, but it could get worse. And you got to approach it with that confidence and conviction through research and preparation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just being human. I totally agree. Like, think about how different that sounded, even as you just kind of rattled that off with me as the target. Then the like, hi, this is JR from Company X. I'm calling to talk to you about, and like that. And that is quote unquote easier, right? To just have a script, you can jam through it and know you need to make 500 calls. And if you do, you get 5 connects. But like, when you can become a human, when you can internalize the thing that you're trying to talk about and then approach it with confidence, conviction, and that level of authenticity, I agree. That's timeless. It doesn't matter the macro or micro. Like if you've got a point of view and they have a real problem, you'll win with the right amount of effort.
Yeah. And I also think like cold calling is going to make a comeback with all these new email rules too, dude. Like when I first started, I'm sure you were the same boat. Like cold calling was the core of like how you drove pipeline. And then we had the introduction of like outreach and sales loft and all these automation and sequencing tools. And in an interest-free environment, you could get away with just relying on that. I don't think you can do that anymore. And I do think the cold call is going to make a comeback, but only a certain amount of people are going to do it right. And I think we just gave them a good playbook.
Totally agree. And I know you are. I'm sure lots of folks are paying close attention to some of the new rules and regs in the U.S. Already some in place in places like the UK. So totally agree. The pendulum seems like it swings, right? And it'll kind of go one way and then come back. How do folks get a hold of you, man? Like, this is awesome. Thank you again for joining us. But how do folks get a hold of the Shift Group? How do they reach out to you if something in our podcast today kind of like hopefully scratch an itch for them?
Yeah, if they can just come to our websites, www.shiftgroup.io. It very clearly points them if they're an athlete or a veteran, or if they're a company, they can just find us right there. Also, you can find me, like you said at the beginning, Brian, I'm on LinkedIn. I never really used LinkedIn in my sales career because I do think it's a little bit of a echo chamber of salespeople and marketing people. I've gotten louder on there the last few years because now that's my audience. I'm trying to reach salespeople. But one of the comments I get from my network and my friends is they love that I get in the mix on LinkedIn. I'm not afraid to comment on people's posts that I don't agree with. So if you want a good laugh, you want to see some LinkedIn wedgies, I'm a good follow on LinkedIn, JR Butler.
Yeah, and authentic. So, like it all the time, hate it all the time. It definitely seems like it's you on there, and I very much appreciate that too. Okay, last thing, man. We do this all the time. We're big on giving back. I know all of us have had our own journeys and our own experiences. Is there a nonprofit organization you want to highlight today when we think about kind of all your journey, your life to get here? and we're going to make a donation in your name to that org. So if there's someone you want to spotlight, please do.
Yeah, so I'm on the board. I helped start a 501c3 called the Line in the Sky Foundation. So before I got to Holy Cross, literally 2 seasons before I got there, 3 Holy Cross hockey players passed away: Jake Jackson, Glenn Crane, and John Bombard. 2 from cancer, and 1 took their own life. And it's one of the reasons why Holy Cross that brought the team back then very close together, going through that, they lost 3 teammates in 18 months. And that culture of closeness and like truly a team and like a family and friends, has lasted for the last 22 years. And I consider my best friends in the world, a lot of them are from my 4 years at Holy Cross, playing hockey. So we started this organization called the Line in the Sky Foundation. And what we do is we raise money and we support people that are battling life-threatening illnesses, specifically cancer and mental health illnesses, by raising awareness and monetary funding. And we work with other charity organizations that are focused on those types of missions, and we raise money in honor of our teammates that have fallen from those 2 things.
Amazing, man. We will we'll be sure to tag them and put a link as well when we post this podcast. So if that resonates with anybody that's listening, they have an opportunity to check them out and potentially donate as well. JR, thank you again. This is a blast. Looking forward to maybe having you back someday. We'll keep tabs on you and on Shift Group. And as your business continues to evolve, if there's more to talk about, we'd love to have you back.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, JR.